Deep Breath is, without any shadow of a doubt in my mind, an episode of Doctor Who first broadcast in 2014 that begins the 8th series of the revival and stars Peter Capaldi as the Doctor and Jenna Coleman as Clara. Alright, fine, I suppose I better give slightly more in-depth analysis than that about this episode. This comes slap bang in the middle of the Moffat era, an era which, despite undoubted flashes of brilliance, was overall a frustrating and mostly disappointing affair. The Heavens Sent like highs were undoubtedly all too rare, and the episodes that weren't downright awful mostly entered predictable mediocrity. Series 8 in particular is a slog. The Caretaker and Kill the Moon in a 2-week period would, I feel, break even the strongest spirits. The series also did not start terribly strongly. While nothing like as bad as some of the other episodes in this series, including the two I just mentioned, Deep Breath is a messy, unfocused affair which ends up deeply unsatisfying for all it tries to achieve. Character arcs are haphazard and ill thought out, the plot is weak and underdeveloped, and the themes undeserved. But we'll get to all of that. Let's begin at the beginning, because as you might have guessed from the haphazard intro, this is a bit of an enigma for me, and let's find out why. Introducing a new Doctor is not an easy thing to do. We've had the downright awful several times, and rarely in my views do these introductory stories rise above average for their series. The only ones I'd say that do are The Power of the Daleks, where the post-regeneration stuff is done after the first 5 minutes and the new Doctor is frustrating to the story, and Spearhead from Space, which is basically introducing an entire new era for the show and therefore could afford to pace itself. Rose doesn't really count as it's not really a post-regeneration story, so yeah. It's been kind of an issue that the format for post-regeneration stories has basically written those making them into a corner before they've even started. The fact the new Doctor has to act all wacky and out of character is a restriction on the kind of character arcs that be created in establishing them. A major problem with this episode is that it seems to be unable to pinpoint what it wants the character of its new Doctor to be, and the line between post-regeneration wackiness and the actual character arc is blurred in a way that makes it very difficult to connect with the intent. The first time around, Moffat decided to get around this by throwing in lots of loud music, explosions, and meaningless speeches, deciding that style did indeed trump substance. The 11th hour is a discussion for another day, but safe to say the spectacle above all else mantra became the dominant one of the era, something that is very present in this episode, and perhaps the reason I will cite if I am ever committed to a mental institution. Apparently it doesn't matter that the characterization of the new lead you're introducing is wildly inconsistent and unengaging, because oh my god, look, dinosaur! We'll get to all of that in more detail, of course. I just wanted to put my main thoughts on the table as to why I find this episode so deeply unsatisfying. That is an exercise where all the thought has been put into the style and none into the substance. I'll start by looking at the non-writing aspects though. As I have previously mentioned, I'm mostly interested in writing and the other stuff is not where my interests or expertise, or lack of it, lies, but you know, it's kind of important as well. It's a visual medium, so we better go over it. The episode was directed by Ben Wheatley, whose only Who credits of this episode and the subsequent one, Into the Dalek. A first-time director with no experience with the show was maybe an odd choice for a Doctor's introductory episode. As far as I can tell, Wheatley does have a reasonably prestigious career outside Who, so perhaps that was why, but unfortunately I don't think the job he does here is all that great. We're not talking Keith Boak levels bad or anything, but most noticeably the camera angles were quite distractingly poor at times. One that stood out to me was when the Doctor was on the rooftop shouting at the dinosaur. Yeah, I know, we'll get to it. And we just got a shot of the Doctor's back without the dinosaur in frame at all. Like, why? What's so important about his back? It also only ever manages astonishingly sedate or stupidly over the top. When Clara is passing out, it almost seems like we're watching some first-year student production with how stupidly over the top it is. The nosedive the script takes for this scene, of course, does not help, but come on man, it's the kind of thing I expect to see in a comedic, not dramatic piece. I'm half expecting one of the students to pop up and go, "Is there a chance the track could bend?" Contrast this to literally 5 minutes earlier when the Doctor and Clara are sitting at a restaurant bickering, and it literally could not be less interesting if it tried. There's no urgency or pace to it, it's just two irritating people taking chunks out of each other. Again, the script doesn't help, but Wheatley simply doesn't make the scene engaging, or get the performance out of his actors to make it engaging. Aside from the directing, there's honestly not really much else to comment on. The special effects aren't great, but, you know, time and budget, I get they exist, I excuse it on the classic show, unless it's seriously egregious I have to be consistent and excuse it here. The soundtrack is just pretty much standard Murray Gold fare, which sort of blends into the background after a while. As much as I love much of Gold's work, I do wish they'd maybe shaken things up a bit by having different composers do different episodes. Maybe this isn't feasible in the way modern British TV works, I don't know, but with the greatest respect, most of the time if you've heard one Gold score, you've heard them all, and bear in mind I do like a lot of his work, as I said. Although, I have to say, both the new arrangement of the theme and the new titles have both grown on me a lot since first broadcast. The theme's actually a pretty refreshing departure from the dreadful Smith arrangement, actually giving the theme its boldest sound since McCulloch got his hands on it, and I think it works quite well. Equally, while the titles aren't a patch on a fan-made version that inspired them, I think they're pretty neat. I particularly like the presentation of Capaldi's face towards the end. Let's be honest, no title except the original feels complete without the face. So, Steven William Moffat. I get a lot of Who fans love his time on the show and his work, and especially with the Chibnall era fresh in our minds, it's easy to look back at what we had and consider if it was unfairly judged. And to be fair, I did, and decided I was right the whole time, and this is a deeply disappointing era in the whole. Deep Breath is emblematic of so many of this era's long-standing problems that were simply never fixed, prioritising style over substance, inconsistent and unlikable characters, weak plotting, huge issues with tone and dreadful attempts at comedy. Now, obviously all of this is subjective, you might love the moments of spectacle or think Moffat is a comedic genius. I don't though, and I'm not forever going to pretend otherwise. Deep Breath opens its tale about characters experiencing and accepting change, from the new Doctor to the body horror-based villains, with a giant dinosaur. The giant dinosaur then vomits out a TARDIS. The Doctor then tries to talk to the giant dinosaur. The giant dinosaur is dead by the 20-minute mark, and the plot continues more or less as if it had never existed. This is completely emblematic of the style over substance approach. Who cares about these pesky things like character or plot, when you can have a dinosaur you can put in the trailers and do cool things for Tumblr GIFs? Ugh. Let's look at each of the elements of this dinosaur I mentioned to explain precisely why they fall so flat on their asses and why this is all to the detriment of the story. First of all, the dinosaur could be written out the plot with minimal effort. Sure, you'd have to find another way to get the Doctor away from Clara and the Paternoster gang, but that's it. It means nothing to the overall story, or to the characterization, or to the themes. It's just there to be a big spectacle. Everyone look at the big exciting thing. Its presence adds nothing of substance, it only adds things of style. The justification for it even being here is astonishingly flimsy. They got chased by it, and apparently eaten. How? Clara doesn't know. Great, thanks for clearing that up. You see why I get so irritated when even a token amount of effort into justifying this meal in this spectacle isn't expended? Next, the dinosaur vomits out the TARDIS. I mean, this is literally just a case of style being chosen over substance. This is spectacle, the TARDIS arriving like this for no other reason than it might look cool. The alternative would be, say, the TARDIS arriving at the Paternoster gang for the blazingly obvious reason. The Doctor brought the TARDIS there purposefully so he could be with people he was familiar with and trusted, not least because he knows Vastra understands regeneration and could help Clara better come to terms with it. This would have enhanced the character work, making the early conflict between Vastra and Clara over this make more sense, and better define Clara's arc. No, we wouldn't have had the big dinosaur going raw, but it would have created more interesting and better defined character conflicts and arcs, which is generally something I prefer in my stories. I'll look more closely at this character stuff and why it doesn't work later, but this would have been an easy way of giving it a boost. Now we get to the Doctor trying to talk to the fucking dinosaur. This is an extension of the absolutely dreadful I speak baby joke from one of the James Corden episodes, and no, I do not intend to check which. No, you do not fucking speak baby, you cretin. Babies do not have a language. But, at least that was just bad comedy rather than actually trying to turn this into a dramatic plot point. The Doctor can speak dinosaur, apparently. No, he can't. Dinosaurs don't speak. They don't have a language. They were not intelligent enough for communication on that level. Their roars expressed nothing more than basic instinctual reactions. Again, while it was about as funny as a lobotomy, at least it was harmless as a shit joke, but there's a scene where the Doctor starts translating it.
I am alone. The world which shook at my feet, and the trees, and the sky have come, and I am alone now. Alone.
Are you translating?
The wind bites now.
I do have to admit, not having seen this episode for a while, at first I thought he was sleep-talking his own inner monologue in order to give some depth to Clara's feelings about him and the regeneration, until she decided to mention he was translating the dinosaur. I should never expect narrative competence from a Steven Moffat script. Even if we ignore what meaningless tripe the actual things being said are, it sounds like a poetry a GCSE English student might write. This scene is generally expecting me to believe the Doctor is translating the roars of a dinosaur into English, as if the dinosaur is capable of having these thoughts or expressing them in any way at all. Actually, it's even worse. In other scenes, he talks back to the dinosaur as if we're expected to believe it can understand English. Inferring from this, it's only its vocal cord structure that's preventing it from having a nice conversation about all of this. Care for some tea, Governor? What's more, this actually has importance to the Doctor's character arc, in theory. When the dinosaur dies, he's regretful at his death having brought it here. Which would have been fine had he just been doing so out of kindness for a creature taken from his home through his fault. But the fact he is basing this apparently on the actual thoughts and emotions of a creature he himself said has the brain the size of a pea 32 years earlier adds a level of idiocy that ruins any potential character the scene might have developed. Doctor Who has pulled off some utterly ridiculous shit over the years, but this is really, really pushing it. The flagrant stupidity here actually astounds me. And yeah, finally, the damn thing dies. As I said, this could have created an interesting moment for the new Doctor, and I guess the effort has to be appreciated, if not for the previously mentioned idiocy. Again, I'm not opposed to it on principle, but here's the thing. First of all, the character effort's spoiled by ending this sombre moment with a jarring tonal shift into a crap joke. This is going to be a bit of a theme. Secondly, that's basically it for the relevance of the dinosaur. Oh yeah, sure, the baddies explain why they killed it, but that's about it, and also it frankly asks more questions than it answers. They say they burned the bodies of their human victims to hide their handiwork, but you're burning the dinosaur before you've got what you need, dipshits. That optical nerve or whatever it was in me, it's not going to be much use if it's a pile of ashes, is it? And the whole point of the burning bit is so no attention is drawn to what you're doing. Yeah, I'm sure no one will notice of a giant dinosaur being set on fire. Good job, guys. But that's it, one offhand reference that creates more plot holes than it fills. See what I mean? The dinosaur being shoved in perspective leads to a chain reaction of poor plotting and characterization sabotage. It's one of Moffat's biggest weaknesses as a writer in my eyes, that this kind of thing is the first thing on his mind and everything else bends around it, which is a completely backwards way of doing things. You first make sure you have a strong plot, your characters' actions make sense and contribute to any arcs they have, all the basics. Then, if you have the space to do it, add some cool stuff. Dalek is one of the best episodes of New Who because of its tight focus on its plot and characters, and even that does have the Dalek flying scene, which is a minute long, adds to the sense of terror surrounding the Dalek, permanently kills the stairs-thwarting Dalek Smith among the general public, and actually is pretty damn cool, which contrasts against the stupid CGI dinosaur taking up 20 minutes of screen time, while the Doctor talks to it. No, I'm not letting that go. Anyway, does this sort of secure into what I think is the biggest problem of this episode actually? Tone. This is another area where Mr. Moffat does not usually excel, but here is even worse than usual. As I mentioned earlier, the Doctor is standing on the bridge over the corpse of a creature, he is lamenting his failure to protect it with dark lighting, and Murray Gold making it clear the sombre nature of the occasion.
A dinosaur is burning in the heart of London. Nothing left but smoke and flame. The question is, have there been any similar murders?
Yes, in case you were actually thinking this might end up mattering, no, it was just all a setup for a shit joke. This kind of thing is throughout the whole episode. Pretty much whenever a moment or drama or character comes up, it gets deflated by Moffat's comedy, TM, coming in and ruining it. For instance, Vastra and Clara butt heads over to regeneration and the latter's attitude to it. We'll get to the scene in more detail, but after Clara does her big speech intended to develop her character arc, intended being the keyword, the atmosphere is completely deflated by Jenny doing this.
Sorry.
Again, how am I supposed to take any of this seriously when the mood whiplash is this great? Deeply concentrate on this character-driven monologue or laugh at the funny noises. Give me strength. Further examples. Between the Doctor watching the dinosaur burn to death and finding its body, we get him falling out of a tree and stealing a horse in a comedy that wouldn't be out of place in a Chuckle Brothers episode. Oh, and when the robot turns humans, block the Doctor and Clara, any atmospheric tension is completely diffused by the jokes, including a balls joke of all things. All it says is can totally drain the atmosphere and tension and weakens the horror, and these jokes are just too lame to make up for it. It results in diluted drama which isn't funny to make up for it. It's not just comedy either. Note when Clara has just had a moment we'll look at later and then is saved by the Doctor. Oh look, the Doctor saved her. That proves he didn't abandon her, meaning for them... ninjas? What? Even ignoring the implausibility of it, it completely takes us out of what the scene was trying to achieve. Character build-up straight into pointless action. This episode is completely unable to commit to a tone, and this does immense damage to all it tries to do. The character arcs are uneven and don't really work, and the plot has enough holes to drive a steam locomotive through, but all of this would have been more forgivable if it hadn't been for whenever there's a moment of depth or reflection, it suddenly cuts to something else that spoils the moment. There is a scene I've already harped on about when a Doctor over the dinosaur corpse. This should have been a defining moment for his character arc this episode. I mean, sure, every Doctor would have been sad to see it die. Maybe not 7. Anyway, it should have been an important moment to establish that despite his grumpier exterior, he's still the Doctor at heart. Granted, the rest of the characterization would have had to be tidied up as well, but mostly that impression is totally ruined by the jump cut to comedy. There are moments this episode nearly gets it, but the inability to commit to a tone completely ruins them. Anyway, the second biggest problem with Deep Breath is poor and inconsistent characterization. As I said earlier, setting up a new Doctor in their first story is not an easy task. Having to get through the expected wackiness and set up their long-term character arc in one go is a difficult minefield to traverse. Even Classic Who trod on this mine several times, even ignoring unmitigated disasters like the Twin Dilemma and Time of the Rani. Even in stories that are overall not that bad, this aspect did falter. The fourth Doctor is too silly and ill-defined in Robot, and the fifth is too confused and distant in Castrovalva. Therefore, looking at Deep Breath expecting it to perfectly set up character arcs for the new Doctor, both in a single episode and in the long term, is probably unrealistic. But it could have been a hell of a lot better than this. The problem is that it just doesn't really feel like it knows what it wants to do with the 12th Doctor at this point. Beyond post-regeneration wackiness, and like it was with a dinosaur or rescuing Clara at the end, stuff you'd expect any Doctor to do, it doesn't feel at all properly defined about what they wanted to do with the character. Other than that, he's a bit of a grumpy arsehole, and that's about it. Even this feels very out of place at times. His irritation with Clara in the restaurant scene seems out of place, given he was asleep while she was talking with Vasta and Jenny about her reservations over the regeneration. So unless he's read the script, his only reason to be irritated with her is the fact she's Clara, so yeah, fair enough, I guess. It still just makes him seem like grumpy and moody for no reason though, which then segues into outright arseholiness, leaving her behind because he was the one dicking around, and then actually coming back and rescuing her? Stay there, I'm coming back for you is not a difficult sentence to say, and actually would make more sense within the context of the character here. Demonstrating that he still cares enough to come back for her right after their bickering session would have been a better choice than him pointlessly being a tool than doing a, aha, not really, seemingly just a fuck with Clara. Hey, don't let me dissuade you of that, I'm just pointing out how inconsistent this is. There's also the bit when he decides to rob a homeless person, which I guess is a bit of an odd thing for our hero to do, but whatever. Anyway, this scene is halfway to being good. The explain the homeless guy is quite capable, and Capaldi rises to the occasion here. Whatever happens with the dreadful Moffat dialogue he's forced to spew, his skills as a physical actor are always on show, and it makes every scene he's in better for them. Also, taking a slow moment to focus on character is good. This episode does have a longer running time than usual. No doubt this would have been binned if it was only 45 minutes, but the extra half hour means scenes like this are an indulgence that can be done. The problem is, though, that this is only really here to address why he looks like Capaldi, which, as you may recall, was not something that was resolved, or indeed even came up again, until pretty much halfway through the next series. It has very little bearing on anything that happens in this actual episode. Alright, there's like one line where he compares it to the villain's face, but that's it. I'm fine with the scene being here, but it should have focused far more on his supposed crisis of identity and how that results in his new darker persona. All of what I said over the Doctor's characters means that his confrontation with the villain is much weaker than it should be. I mean, yes, there's a lot of stupidity in the setup. The building that just happens to be a spaceship the whole time, the fucking skin balloon, and these idiot policemen. When a robot's not engaged in his employment. But when you get down to it, it's a great moment of confrontation. The Doctor is faced with an enemy he has to stop, but whose instinct for survival is too great for anything other than destroying him to be an option. It therefore tests the new Doctor. Does his newfound personality, still committed to preservation of innocent life, but darker as a result of his introspection, means he's willing to push him? Or does he still have to rely on him talking him into jumping? It's a fantastic setup, no doubt, and indeed the fact that the audience is left to decide for themselves is undoubtedly an excellent choice. But the problem is nothing has been leading to this point. Just taking the episode as it is, it's just the Doctor is being a bit of a grumpy twat, so he's suddenly obsessed with killing this guy. This should have been a fantastic defining moment, and to be fair, it is still the best part of the episode, if you ignore the cuts to the stupid action scenes, but Capaldi once again demonstrating his phenomenal acting skills here. It's just the build-up isn't there to make this part of a coherent character arc though, and that is unfortunate. This also seems like an opportune time to discuss the villain and what a terrible missed opportunity this is, and it might give you into wonder as to why the fucking about with the dinosaur pissed me off so much. Head Robot Man, as I'm now lovingly going to refer to him, and his robots, form a very loose sequel to the girl in the fireplace, basically acting up as another set of robots that went nuts and murdered everyone for their organs. How lovely and upbeat. Anyway, the kicker here is that unlike the fireplace robots that were basically just generic baddies, these guys, and Head Robot Man in particular, should have been so much more, as while they're basically just replacing their body parts with human ones, they are becoming more human as a result. Indeed, they basically lost what originally made them them. How much longer is a robot if he's flesh and blood? It's a fascinating question, and would have made for a brilliant villain if it had been given anything more than the bare minimum of attention. In the actual episode, this is all explained through exposition, and mere minutes dedicated to it at the end. It also doesn't help right in the middle of the most important bit, where the Doctor does the whole only fools and horses broom bit, there's another crap joke, and throughout the entire scene the Doctor keeps going, I should remember this, but I don't, again and again and again and again, as if Moffat thinks the audience is too thick to fucking get what he's talking about. Nothing like enough time is dedicated to this fascinating concept. For instance, the idea of the robot developing a religion. Instead of just having the Doctor tell us about how this was picked up through getting more human bits, show us! Develop it! He keeps yabbering on about the Promised Land. Well, show us where this came from, what it actually means to him. Again, it would take time away from the dinosaur and a stupid joke with a horse, but I thought developing your villains was a slightly more important part of creating a story than that. Such an extremely frustrating waste. Well, I suppose there's no putting it off. It is time to discuss Clara Oswald. In case my snipes throughout this course of the video have not made it clear, I cannot overstate how much I loathe this character. To make a long story short, I find her to be an arrogant, overbearing, self-centered prick, who treats the people around her like shit, yet the script always twists characters and actions so that she ends up being the one in the right. Take for instance Kill the Moon, where the Doctor is made to act horrendously out of character just so Clara could be justified in being the great hero of the piece and in the right. Or how about Dark Water, where she locks the Doctor out of his home and threatens to permanently destroy his access to it so she can bend the laws of the universe, and his reaction is just, oh well, these things happen, let's get going. At least with Adric, everyone on screen hated him just as much as the audience did. Clara's insufferable behaviour drives me nuts. The way the scripts treat this behaviour drives me even more nuts. Clara's arc in this episode is about her acceptance of regeneration, and to be fair, this is not a bad idea in conception. While I find that regeneration is some enormous event that's like death shit from the end of time and the 12th Doctor's final arc extremely stupid from the Doctor's point of view, something similar actually makes a lot of sense from the companion's point of view. I'm therefore not entirely opposed to the idea that Clara, unfamiliar with regeneration, might need to be eased into acceptance of this new Doctor. It has been a little silly that companions over the years have just gone, oh, his face changed, that's a really minor change, I'll get over in minutes. Especially, say, Tegan in Castrovalva, who's known the Doctor for like half an hour, just happily accepts this person who looks and acts totally different to the same person. I'm aware some have taken issue with the fact that Clara does have some familiarity with regeneration, as she met the 10th and War Doctors and they're the Doctor, and therefore shouldn't really be acting like this. I'm fine with that though. Seeing it happen in front of her to the Doctor she's familiar with is a very different thing to happen than just meeting other Doctors, so yeah, this isn't an issue for me. So yeah, overall, not opposed to this in principle. In execution though? Oh boy. To start with this, whether this is A, Clara expressing reasonable doubts and reservations about what has happened and getting over them, or B, Clara being shallow and unable to accept that just because she can't let go of Eleven and what he represented, this needed to be decided and stuck with, because the episode changes between the two as it pleases, and this inconsistency kills this arc stone dead. At first Clara is confused and wants answers as to what might have happened and what it means. Vastra, recognising the Doctor's companion might not have grasped the full implications of regeneration, carefully explains what has happened to Clara so she can, oh no, sorry, I'm recounting the version not written by an idiot. Actually, Vastra acts all pissy with Clara, deciding she's going to be contemptuous towards her just because someone completely changing what they look like in front of her is not a concept she instantly and immediately accepts. It's impressive to be a bigger dickhead in a room containing Clara Oswald, but Vastra manages it. What makes this even more bizarre though is the subsequent meeting they manage to have, that makes it extremely confusing what Vastra's actual endgame is here. Is she actually pissed off with Clara? Is she trying to goad Clara into saying what she actually thinks? Or is she just trying to yank her chain? That's honestly as good an explanation as any, because to say this scene is confused is an understatement. It of course does not help that Clara is not helping herself for how she presents herself over both these scenes. Her basic refusal to accept she is guilty of any kind of misinterpretation, or indeed the fact she has to be politely reminded by Jenny that she in fact is in love with her wife and does not just hang around for the purpose of getting some of that reptile bod. Oh god, it's just occurred to me there is definitely Rule 34 for these two, isn't there? Where's the brain bleach for that? Anyway, none of this works because Vastra's motivation for acting so judgmental are not clear, and Clara doesn't help herself by being unable to accept how her judgment needs to change. It's especially irritating because even in these two scenes, the story can't choose between the A and B options I listed earlier. Clara is being reasonably confused about what has happened. Oh no, she's actually being unreasonably irritated by it. Oh no, we're back to reasonable confusion again. This becomes even more confusing when the Doctor and Clara reach the restaurant. They appear irritated at each other because they think the other placed the ad in the newspaper to contact them. Which, by the way, surely Clara's first question should have been, how did the Doctor even do this given he has no money and the newspapers probably tend to ask for a bit more lead on time for ads to be printed than the same day it goes out? Yeah, I know it was actually Missy, I did watch the episode, but Clara looks like an idiot for not thinking of that. Anyway, where was I before I was nitpicking plot holes? Oh, right, yeah, so the Doctor and Clara are pissed off at each other for using a cryptic form of communication, which does seem a bit odd to me, but there we are. Anyway, we get a buttload of vacuous bickering that adds nothing to either character, especially Clara's, and we have left no closer to understanding her feelings about the new Doctor. Anyway, long story short, the Doctor farts around, gets her trapped, and buggers off, which leads us into the stupidest bit of the episode, which given this involves the Doctor speaking to a dinosaur is pretty impressive. Clara has to hold her breath in a bit of silliness I'll get to later, and as a result of oxygen deprivation starts getting flashbacks to the first time she was a teacher. How do we know this? Yeah, apparently that's something real children actually say in the Moffat universe. Anyway, what the living fuck this has to do with anything is completely lost on me. It's the Doctor's first day as well? I mean, that's about it. I guess it sort of sets up the next scene where she decides to play hardball with Head Robot Man over the information gathering.
We will not answer questions!
Then you might as well kill me, because I'm not talking again until you do.
Nah, just fucking with you. Although in a reality where villains had brains, that's probably what would have happened. As I said earlier, this falls flat because this scene isn't even necessary. The Doctor could have just said, "I'll be back for you," and then Clara gets captured, and then stalls for time, while wondering whether she can trust the Doctor and what he said. Generally, I don't like rewriting the scripts I'm reviewing as part of these videos, but sometimes it's so obvious I have to. Her overall arc of trusting and coming to terms with the new Doctor is therefore not being reflected in any way whatsoever during this scene, and instead a completely different arc that temporarily replaces it. One must always be able to follow up on one's threats, is apparently the key of this, which ties into how Clara has acted in this episode. Somehow. Also, if the head robot man was smart, he would have followed up on it, so one must always be able to follow up on one's threats, unless you're a villain in a Steven Moffat script. If you're not seeing the issue here, let me explain. The point of this arc was to demonstrate Clara's reaction to the regeneration and what that means for her character. And we had 2 conversations with Astra, and maybe being subtext in the restaurant scene if you squint a bit. The character arc is set up just sort of rounds to a halt halfway through, to be replaced by whatever the fuck this is. So once the main plot's resolved, the Doctor and Clara are away. Oh no, look, we forgot about this arc, didn't we? Whoops. How else to do that then? Let's have the former Doctor ring up and have to literally tell Clara to stop being such an arse. I don't like this cameo for the following reasons. A, it cheapens Capaldi's Doctor introduction by insinuating that a new Doctor can't be properly accepted, and we need the older, more popular Doctor to tell the audience just as much as Clara. B, the inconsistency in Clara's arc makes it redundant. This has gone backwards and forwards on what Clara's actual thoughts on this are, and that this is being dredged up again after being canned in favour of a flashback involving What's-Her-Face from the Caretaker and Kill the Moon. C, it's just juvenile drama resolution. If you genuinely wanted Clara's doubts to be a proper character arc, it needed to be constant and resolved in the finale of the actual plot. For it to be a problem at the start, disappear for the whole of the middle of the episode, then return at the end with no real change, only for a tacked-on phone call to resolve it is just ridiculous. I mean, I guess there's also D. Smith sounds like he does not want to be doing this, and frankly I don't blame him, but that's more minor. Anyway, this is just a frustratingly inconsistent mess of an arc that can't decide on how it wants to portray Clara or deal with her. Genuinely focusing on one aspect of this, including in her conversations with Astra, and having it be a constant throughout the episode, including in the restaurant and the breath-holding scenes, would have been much better. Giving Clara flaws to overcome, and her acceptance of the Doctor at the end of the episode would have been a more satisfying conclusion as a result. If you didn't want to have it totally resolved at the end of this episode, that also works. Why not have Clara accepting of the change and that he is still the Doctor, but in a way that's different to how she liked, and have her be resentful at being left behind, which could have led the Doctor to realise he was being an arse and should have reassured her he had a plan. This is tension that could carry through, that they both need to work on. Instead we get... Anywho, there aren't actually that many other characters that are left to look at. The Paternoster gang return to make their final televised appearance. I actually, and given my opinion on New Who as a whole, you might be surprised by this, don't mind these guys at all. They're 3 fairly unique characters who interact well and provide an interesting viewpoint in the episodes they appear in. Vastra does come across as authoritative and intelligent, and Jenny is capable and headstrong, and their relationship does come across as believable. And it's a nice bit of LGBT representation, bearing in mind back in the early 2010s this wasn't a given by any stretch. These days, of course, it would be cried as woke indoctrination, or whatever the idiots are calling it these days, so yeah. I'll admit though, I wonder if making Who's first televised out LGBT couple and interspecies romance was the best idea, given the latter tends to mean the weirdness of the relationship is played up, which does not do great things as representations for the former. As a non-LGBT person myself, I'm not terribly qualified to comment, so other opinions on this would be interesting, and given I myself made a joke about the interspecies aspect earlier on, probably means I'm as guilty as anyone else, so, sorry. In this episode, Jenny's moment where she has to remind Clara that she did not marry for shallow reasons is probably their best moment, reinforcing their relationship while providing a counterpoint to Clara's behaviour. And then there's Strax. Look, this is probably going to get my grumpy sod about Doctor Who licence revoked, but I kind of like Strax. I'll go as far as to say he's the only consistently funny character of the whole Moffat era. My mantra of Sontarans is that you have to go all out on either approach with them. Either do a serious story about war and honour and all that, or just have them as total and utter buffoons. Their portrayal in both the RTD and Chibnall eras made this mistake. They're both brutal warriors subjugating Earth and goofy potato heads who like ransacking corner shops for chocolate. I wouldn't have minded the chocolate scenes if it was part of a story in which the Sontarans were the butt of endless jokes. I do mind that it creates an enormous whiplash with them executing people in the same episode. So Strax is therefore a perfect example of option 2. He's a walking joke, and the scripts never shy away from promoting that. But it's also good, but that doesn't mean he has to be Jar Jar Binks or anything. He can still prove his worth. Frequently his stills come in useful, but it does mean he's always played for comedy, and that's fine, because it means there's always going to be a constant tone when Strax is around. And, as I said, in an era where Whose comedy was just painful most of the time, he does manage to be consistently funny. Perhaps it's the niche of writing Sontaran comedy, or perhaps it's Dan Starkey's delivery, or perhaps a mix of both. But even in this irrelevant silliness of a scene, Strax manages to be a funny presence. Although, admittedly, here he is being a bit Zoidberg.
Now open your mouth and let's have a look at that brain. No, not that mouth.
But yeah, Strax is a refreshing bit of fresh air when it comes to the comedy of this era, so sue me. If you put an actually funny character in front of me, I'm going to praise it. Sorry. So I guess there's a few wider things I should talk about. Moffat's dialogue and comedy is mostly awful. I'm going to have plenty of opportunities over these reviews to look at these two aspects, so I'm not going to go into any real detail here, just they are bad. Explaining the philosophy of a bedroom is not endearing, it is stupid and adds nothing, for instance. But again, this will be looked at in more detail another time. Anywho, before we finish up, there's one more stupid thing I want to bring attention to. I'm not going to point out every plot hole in every review, because frankly we'd be here for weeks for most of Moffat-era scripts, but if it's something important enough to put in the title of the episode, then I'm going to look at it. Yes, the way to fool the robots is to hold a deep breath. Now, 2 points. First of all, if these fucking robots are so stupid they can't realise that these people who are fighting and killing them seconds ago might be fellow robots just because they're not breathing, then how the hell am I supposed to take them seriously as a threat? Remember, they were service robots. I wouldn't want these guys fixing my sink if they're that stupid, never mind an interstellar spacecraft. Secondly, it's on a completely false premise. Breathing is not the only bodily function that differentiates living beings from robots. Clara, for instance, here is blinking. Her body is going to twitch involuntarily. Her pulse is going to go off. And again, she looks nothing like any of them, and indeed if they've been here for millions of years, they should recognise their peers by now. But I digress. Again, the only way to square it is that these robots are idiots, and I should not be taking them seriously in any way. Oh, there's a scene at the end as well. This is actually quite interesting given the later information that Missy is the Master and does lend some character credence to what happened on the ship. Without that information though, this is just kind of very stupid and makes no sense. I'll let you decide whether that makes this scene any good or not, because frankly, I'm done. Final score for Deep Breath is 3 out of 10. It's not completely without merit, the foundations of good character moments are there, it does have some scenes that do work, and, there's a lot worse. By Series 8 standards, it barely registers on the shitometer. But ultimately, it's a disappointment. Character arcs are inconsistent and don't work, the villains are undeveloped and weak, the plot is full of enough holes to be legally considered a cheese, and it wastes its generous running time on irrelevant stuff that adds nothing. And he speaks fucking dinosaur, I'm still not over it. So yeah, in my view, this is a sadly unimpressive outing that frankly could and should have been quite a bit more. Thank you for watching. If you did enjoy, please leave a like and subscribe. If you would like to see a certain New Who or Classic Who episode reviewed, please do let me know and I'll see what I can do. Thank you.